So when we talk about number sense, a lot of people start to wonder, what does that even mean? What exactly are we talking about when we are saying we want to develop number sense in children? So I will quickly start with a story. So I once worked in a school where the target for the 3 to 4 year olds was to learn to write 1 to 200. And then, okay, the teacher was like, okay, the children need to learn to write 1 to 200. We have to find a way to get it, because of course, getting the 3-year-old to write to 200 was like a lot of work. How would they even understand it? So this teacher found a very easy way out, where the children would get their books, you know, the 10 boxes at the top of the book and all the way down, and all they would need to do is write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then when they get there, they now go to the bottom, then they write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like basically writing their 10s, 20s, 30s, all the way to the bottom. They get to 20, they write 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, all of that. So at the end of the children are just trying to understand how to just continue a pattern of 1 to 9, 1 to 9, 1 to 9, and then they are now adding 1, 1, 1. So it wasn't like the children didn't even understand what they were doing. And at the end of the day, you call them, can you identify 45? Can you show me 50? Can you show me 60? And they didn't know how to do it. So thinking about it recently, I said, I've seen a lot of things happen like this in different cases. So that's why I thought, okay, I need to share how we can develop number sense in children. Hi everyone, very nice to be here to share with everyone developing number sense in children. So I just shared a short story of how I saw a teacher teach 1 to 200 to 3 to 4 year olds without ensuring that the children understood what they were doing. All they were doing was just filling up their books with the numbers in a particular way that no one understood how they arrived at it at the end of the day. So that's just the story I just shared. So now let's get to it. Let me start by talking about what number sense is. When we talk about developing number sense in children, what do we exactly mean by the word or the term number sense? So when we talk about number sense, it's a skill that enables children to understand mathematical concepts. So number sense is a skill that you have to consciously build, consciously develop, like you're intentional when you're planning your math activities for your learners, because you know that there is an end goal. You want to ensure that they understand math concept no matter how much, no matter how big the numbers are. And I've come to realize over time that when you are building number sense in children, it is not about how big the numbers are. So I don't necessarily have to be teaching my 2-year-old to write 1 to 100, or teaching a 3-year-old to write to 300, or a 4-year-old to write to 500. I don't necessarily have to be teaching that. I could only be teaching them numbers from 1 to 10, but the different activities, the different ways they can walk around that numbers is what would determine how much of number sense has been developed in them. And then over time you will see that when they move on to the next classes, when they start to work with bigger numbers, because of that understanding that they already have. That is what we talk about. That is what number sense really is. Because of that understanding that they have, they are able to walk around numbers. So say for instance, I have a child who understands counting back from 10 to 0. They understand how that happens. If you have to tell them to count back from 50 to 0, because they already understand that when you're counting back, you're basically going from your 10, then your 9 and your 8, then they start to think about, okay, 50 and then my 49, my 48, so basically using that 9, 8, 7 as well. So I don't know if you understand that. They have to understand that pattern. So that is the skill that you develop in children. It's not just about getting them to do so much work. When you're developing number sense in children, it is necessarily not about doing so much work or about writing a whole lot. You're basically using activities, you're using manipulatives. We'll get to that where we'll talk about the different ways that you can develop number sense in children. Number sense, it is like a key ability for the children to be able to understand quantities, to be able to understand concepts in different ways. So getting children to be able to understand key concepts and having the ability to like represent numbers in different ways, understand how it is represented or the different pattern through which numbers can be represented. Now, what are the activities that we can use to develop number sense in children? What are some of those activities that are important? So the first one is counting games. So counting games, so like I said, you're using everyday objects, because when you're having to teach children, you need to ensure that it is something that they are familiar with, things that they can relate with. So you start with your counting games using everyday objects. That way, the goal is to help them to understand quantity. So when you're counting 1, you're counting 5, they're getting to see, okay, which one comes first. So their counting helps them to sequence. So when I talk about sequencing means arranging it in the right order. Which one comes next? Which one comes next? Which one comes next? So when I say 1, next is 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. That is sequencing numbers forward. You can also sequence numbers backwards. So counting games, you use everyday objects. When you're using objects, they are able to see the quantity that they can use to represent the numbers. So when I say 5, for instance, they can count out 5 objects. When you say 3, they can count out 3 objects. Now, I've been to a place where when I looked through their book, it was a school that I visited one time, and when I looked through their books, I saw that on Monday the children wrote 1 to 10. On Tuesday they wrote like 11 to 20. Wednesday like 20 to 21, and that was like the order. The children just kept writing numbers and numbers and numbers. So I had to have a conversation with the teachers and the school leaders to say, what, aside number writing, what is your goal for those children? Basically, the only target they had set for those kids was to be able to write numbers from 1 to maybe 100 or 200, depending on their age. But developing number sense in children helps them to understand a lot more than number writing. So when I talk about counting games and getting them to quantify, some children, you will tell them, can you give me 5 pencils? And they don't know when to stop. They just keep counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And you have to like call their attention back to, no, 5 pencils. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. At that point, you realize that the child does not understand quantity. They don't understand how to represent the quantity with the number that you have given, because all they've been taught is maybe just counting and number writing. So when you play counting games using everyday objects, you're able to represent the numbers with a certain group of objects. So that's one important thing to do. So that is, counting games is a good way to help children to count and represent with different quantity. Now, the next one is number recognition. So, like I mentioned earlier, children can write 1 to 200. When you ask for 140, and they don't even know what is 140, which one is 140, all I know is how to write. Because when they are writing, they've already crammed that pattern of writing 1, 2, 3, 20, 21, but they don't even know which number is represented with this particular figure or with this particular word that you have said. So number recognition is another activity that you can use to develop number sense in children, using visuals, using flashcards, using charts. Now that way they get familiar with the numerals. So when you say, for instance, show me 20, they're able to show you 20, show me 9, show me 8, and you would realize that when children have a deep understanding, when children have been able to identify or to have a good understanding of numbers 1 to 10 and then 11 to 20, it makes it a lot easier when you start to get to bigger numbers. So I would say there's no rush. Don't rush to get to 50. Ensure that if all you're teaching is 11 to 20, your learners have a good understanding of 11 to 20 before you now start to extend it. And that extension, sometimes I would ask, be sure that it is necessary, because there are a lot of other concepts like counting forward, counting backwards, like subitizing, like comparing numbers. There are a lot of other concepts, I will still get there, that you would need to teach before you start to talk about numbers to 50. So don't rush. Don't try to ensure that, oh, before they leave this class, they have to get to 1,000, because the parents will always complain that the children in other schools. Now, one thing I would advise is sensitize parents. So even as you're trying to ensure that your children have a good understanding of numbers and you have a good reason not to move on to 30, be sure that your parents are well aware of the skills that you're trying to develop in their children. So let them understand that even if your friend's child in another school can write 1 to 500, now look at the skill your child has with only writing to 20. It can identify the numbers, it can count them back, it can count them forward, it can add numbers within them, it can solve word problems. Now, can that child writing to 500 do that? So let them understand, and even if the child can do that, that's fine. But we have to ensure that your child masters the skill before we extend their learning. So be sure to sensitize your parents. So activities to develop number sense. So 1, I've mentioned counting games using everyday objects. 2, I've mentioned number recognition. So number recognition, you use visual aids, you use charts, ensure that, okay, they can identify 19, they can identify 20. Now, when children get to understand these numbers, by the time they start to get to numbers like 25, they know that your 20 has a 2 first, because your 20 has a 2 4, which is a 2 tenths, and then 5 is the 5 units. When they start to get to 34, okay, 30, my 3 tenths, and my 4 units, because you've used different hands-on materials to represent the smaller numbers. When they move on to the bigger numbers, there's certain skill that you won't need to explain. You won't need to explain it anymore because they already understand it. So on their own, they can work independently, which is the goal. Not about spoon feeding them all the way because you want to get them to go as far as possible. But it is mostly about getting them to understand what they're doing. Now, one thing I've noticed is, no matter how much we rush for children in the early years, no matter how much we rush them to get to 100 or 200 or 500, when they get to year 1, do you know they start from 1 all over again? Like, are you well aware that from year 1, they start from 1 all over again? So if that is still going to happen, why exactly do we feel the need to push them? And you'll be surprised that some year 1 classes don't even have a target of getting the children to 200. Maybe it's just 100. And then year 2, they are getting to 200. So where exactly are we like pushing them all the way to? Because there's really no need to rush. The most important thing is getting them to understand the skills. The next one I'm talking about now, the next activity to develop number sense is one-to-one correspondence. One-to-one correspondence, which is like pretty much close to quantifying. Here you're getting the child to be able to understand how each object corresponds to a number. So when I put 4 down, how am I able to place 4 objects there? When I put 3 down, how am I able to place 3 objects there? Or when I put 4, how am I able to match it to the number? So some of these can go with like matching games, or you can use your paper plates where you write a number and ask them to place a number of objects inside the paper plate, or you can use a cup, or you can use a tissue roll, and then you put your popsicle stick with the number, and then they get to like put the number of maybe pom-poms. They can use their tweezers and pom-pom. That way you're developing multiple skills at the same time. You're looking at your fine motor skill, and then number recognition, number matching, like one-to-one correspondence is being developed there. So these are key activities to develop number sense in children. So number 4, use manipulatives. Use manipulatives. Be sure that the children are touching. They're not just looking at it, because it is not just all about the teacher doing all the activity. They are also getting involved in their own learning. They are touching, they are putting it where it's supposed to be. Maybe they are hopping into boxes to show, okay, 3 children here, 2 children here, 5 children here. They're getting to see how they can use themselves to represent the number, working with their friends. So ensure to use manipulatives. Ensure that children are touching things. That's like hands-on activities. So be sure to ensure that these activities are not just about you talking to them saying this is number 5, this is number 4, okay, now this is 1, this is 2. Let them touch number 1 on a flashcard. Let them pick one object up. Let them represent one on their finger. You realize that some children, as much as they can count, when you tell them, show me 5 on your fingers, they're not even sure. Okay, which is 5? Well, how am I supposed to count it? So now I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When children have a strong number sense, when you tell them to show you 4, they don't even need to count. They just like raise it up, like here. When you tell them 7, they already know their number bonds. We'll get to number bonds. They already know their number bonds. They don't have to start counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They just think, okay, 4 and 3. This is 7. Okay, 5 and 2. This is 7. They can already represent the numbers in different ways. We'll get to number bonds. Okay, actually, that's the next one here. Number bonds. So I'll do a recap quickly. 1 is using counting games. 2, number recognition. 3, one-to-one correspondence. And 4, using manipulatives. And the 5th one now is number bonds. Hands-on activities get them very much involved. That is very true. It helps to develop their number sense as well. So we have the number bonds. Now, number bonds is basically children getting to understand the different ways numbers can be represented. I'll tell a short story. I had been teaching since about 2013. That was when I started teaching. And then in the year 2017 was when I had to work in a particular British school where it was like fully EYFS. And one of my first observation in the school was they were teaching 5-year-olds number bonds. And then they had to learn about number bonds of numbers to 10. And the teacher was telling them how they can represent 10 using 7 and 3, 5 and 5. And the first thought that came to my head was, isn't this too much? 5-year-old, how are they going to understand it? Shouldn't they be doing other things like addition, like writing numbers? You know, because I was coming from a Nigerian school where this is all they had always done. So I was observing, so I was telling them, okay, so we want to represent apples, we want to share apples between 2 children. I remember that lesson. So they were using apples and they had like a hula hoops placed on the table, so they had to like group the numbers. Okay, let's represent 10, 5, 5, okay, another way, 7, 3, another way, 8 and 2, another way, 9 and 1. And I saw all of this and I was thinking, wow, this is too much. Why are they teaching children this? And guess what? The children understood. Like they were able to, before the end of that week, they were able to represent numbers in different ways. They would tell them 7 and 3. Tell us, okay, let's switch it. 3 and 7. Okay, 8 and 2. Can you switch it? 2 and 8. And they got it. And you know, that like I was in awe, like how is this possible? 5-year-olds, they're able, like 4 to 5-year-olds basically, because it was like the reception class. How are they able to represent 10 in different ways? And you know, that opened my mind up to how much children can learn when you are consistent. Mental maths, that's it. They're able to count mentally. So that way, when they start to do addition, there are some addition activities that you would give them. Maybe they move on to year 1 and they're now asking them, what is 10 plus 5? What is 15 plus 8? And all of the things like that. They don't even need to start counting. They can already use their number bonds. They can already think, okay, I'm thinking 15 and 8. Okay, 10 and 8 is 18. Then I have 5 more. And before you know it, they have their answer. They have their answer. So when you are consistent with the ensuring that the children master a skill, you will see how much more they are able to do. So number bonds help the children to reason, helps them to understand numbers and how different numbers can be made, how numbers can be represented in different ways. When they start to do number factoring like Key Stage 1, it makes it a lot easier because they now understand, have a good understanding of the numbers and the different ways they can be represented. So that was the 5th one, number bonds. The next is pattern recognition. Pattern recognition, recognizing patterns now is also a good way to develop problem solving skill. So here you can use shapes, you can use your colors, you can use your numbers. Okay, so if I'm making a pattern, I'm saying 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. What's the next one? It can tell you. You can use your shapes. You can say, okay, triangle, square, what's the next one? Before you know it, you can move on from your AB pattern to your ABB, like representing with numbers and objects like that. So you can use different objects as well. And one thing I've come to understand is that pattern recognition also helps the children to understand the pattern of number writing. So you get to a stage where you don't have to teach them how to write 1 to 50. When they've been able to write 1 to 10, then they know that I need to just add my 110 and my 1 to 9 again. So you just add my 110, my 110 and 1, my 110 and 2, my 110 and 3, and that they understand that pattern. By the time they get to 20, then okay, my 20 now, my 2 is my 2 tenths. So I have my 2 tenths and 1, my 2 tenths and 2, my 2 tenths. By the time you get 30, okay, 3 tenths and 1. You will realize that that number writing would be a lot easier. At this point, I'm talking key stage 1. So you wouldn't need to force them to say, let's write 1 to 100. Oh, are you tired? Don't be tired. This child doesn't like to write. Because at that point, they didn't even understand what they are doing. But when they have that good understanding, through patterns, they are able to do 1 to 10, and then it makes it easier. Okay, 11 to 20. As they move on in their classes, it makes it a lot easier for them because they understand the pattern and they're able to just follow through all the way to 100 or even more as they move on in their different classes. So this is why it is important for you to start to develop all these skills from their early years before they move ahead onto key stage 1 or their primary classes. So next is estimation. Next is estimation. A lot of teachers think, why do I need to get my children to estimate? They can just count. Estimation is actually good because it's also a way for them to start to just take a guess, understand the pattern. So I have 5 to 10. I have 5 to 10 objects placed, and I'm saying, can you estimate? Now, I'm not asking you to count. What they are doing is guessing without having to count 1, 2, 3. Okay, I think you have 8. I think you have 7. Now, the more they estimate, the closer they start to getting the numbers correct. Because gradually they start to understand the pattern through which the numbers are grouped. Let's look at groups of 5, groups of 10. Before you know it, they start to get it correctly. So when children are estimating, you're not looking for them being correct. You're only encouraging them to estimate so they can start to understand number groupings and see how close they will get to getting the numbers of objects correctly. So estimation is also a good way to develop number sense. Now next is comparison, comparing numbers. It is very important that children understand how to compare numbers, ways to compare numbers. Now you start to talk about which is more, which is less, which is greater, which is the biggest number. So you can write a group of numbers. I have 5, I have 9, I have 1, I have 3. And you're asking which is the greater number of all, which is the least number, which number is more, which object is less. So that way they are looking to compare the numbers. So they can see different numbers and start to think, okay, which is bigger, which is fewer. They are thinking the quantities. Okay, when I have 5, when I have 2, which number is more? Which one gives me more? Which one gives me less? You're asking, if I have 8 apples and she has 2, who has more? Who has less? You're starting to use those key vocabulary to ensure that they are comparing numbers, they are comparing quantity correctly. And like I said, you don't have to start with bigger numbers. When there's so much you can do with children from 1 to 10. There's a whole lot you can do. That when they understand those concepts, it becomes way easier for them as they move on. So look at your comparing numbers, greater, less, and all of those. And the next is word problems. A lot of early years teachers don't think it is important to teach children word problems. But when you teach them these, you make it a lot easier for them when they move on to the next classes, when they move on to their primary classes. Because we focus on the wrong things. We focus on counting, we focus on writing, but we're not looking at how much we can extend their ability to count, to compare, to represent these numbers before moving on to the bigger activities like writing to 200 and then comparing numbers between 100 and 200. When they are able to do this independently with numbers to 10, it makes it a lot easier as they move on to bigger numbers. So when you're solving word problems, start to tell them stories like, number stories like, I have 5 apples. I gave my sister 3. How many apples do I have now? And they are thinking, is it addition? Is it subtraction? Now, you're not working with the big numbers. That is critical thinking. Thank you so much. You're not working with the big numbers yet. Like I said, by the time they move on to year 1 and they start to extend the numbers, it makes it a lot easier. So you have built that foundation with those key skills. You're not looking at rushing. You're looking at developing the key skills, making them excel, making them display confidence when it comes to problem solving, when it comes to mathematical concepts. So, like I've mentioned, word problems. Now, the next one I will see it will still link to word problems and the other things, is using mathematical language. Like, one of the things I do with my 5-year-olds is, before I start to introduce addition, subtraction, or word problems, now we talk about the key words, even other concepts. We talk about the key words. So we're saying, okay, in this lesson, we'll be talking about addition, for instance. Now we need to learn the addition keywords. So we teach them words like more. We teach them words like total, add, sum, plus, increase. So before we even start to add, they understand that these are the keywords you will be hearing. So when you hear these keywords, we're talking about addition. So before we start, they've already learned plus, they've learned increase, they've learned add, they've learned sum, they've learned all together, they've learned join. So you introduce them to the keywords. So by the time you start to tell them about word problems and you say, my mommy has 10 apples, my sister gave her 2 more. Once they hear more, they tell you more, that's an addition keyword, so I need to add. So teaching them keywords help them to understand. You do the same thing for your subtraction. If you have to teach subtraction, you first of all start by talking about your keywords. Remove, deduct, take away, minus, subtract. So teaching keywords help them to understand. When you tell that number story, my mom has 3 apples, my sister took 1. They're already telling you, okay, take, that's a subtraction keyword. So they understand the keywords and they are able to say, okay, this is what I need to do. The same thing when you're teaching measurement, when you're teaching height, let them know, okay, what are the keywords for height? Here we're talking about tall and short. I'm teaching length. What are the keywords for length? Here we're talking about long and short. What are the keywords for weight? We're using heavy, light, heavier, lighter than. So teaching keywords is also another way to get children to reason. So when you start to talk about your word problems, or you're reading a number story, or you're asking them to, okay, which is heavier, which is lighter, they already know what you're talking about. You're teaching them this is weight, this is height. Some teachers think, let's just teach this concept. They were talking about full and empty. What does full and empty mean? I don't know. I only know that, okay, this is full, this is empty. But you need to explain that we're talking about capacity. Let them understand what that keyword is. These children can understand it. So that way, when they hear it, they already know, okay, capacity, we're talking full and empty. Okay, length, we're talking long and short. Okay, weight, we're talking heavy and light. So teach keywords to children. That is very important. It also helps them to problem solve. It helps them to reason. And lastly, I think I have here games and puzzles. Use as games and puzzles as much as possible. Now, recently I shared a post on how I use the game Snakes and Ladders in my classroom. So I use snakes and ladders, maybe like as a morning activity, right there on the table. The children can start to do that or do other things. So that's snakes and ladders. You realize that you're getting them to display skills in different ways. So even when we've not taught them numbers like 50, numbers like 20, they are counting on. They are getting to land on the numbers. So they are rolling their die and they're saying 4. They don't have to start to say 1, 2, 3, 4. This is 4. 1, 2, this is 2. They can already subitize. So that skill of subitizing, which is saying how many without counting, they are developing that skill of subitizing by playing that game. And they are able to say, okay, quantify, I rolled my die, I had 5. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I stopped. That is how to represent 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. I stopped. That is how to represent 4. So they are already having their quantifying one-to-one correspondence happening there. They're also getting to move on, like to know, okay, now this is counting forward. I'm moving on to a bigger number. When they get on the snake and they have to go down, I'm coming back to a smaller number. Be sure that you're using real world connection. Be sure that you're using things that the children can relate with. One thing I like to do when I want to teach word problems, I use the children's names. So when I'm getting my slides ready and everything, I make sure that I'm calling the children's names. So I could be like, if a child in my class is Taiwo, for instance, I could be like, Taiwo has 5 apples, and then he gave out 2 apples to Kenny. How many does he have now? So you see the excitement in their faces. Oh, she called my name. She called my name. It's hard to feel like celebrities. So it gets them excited. So I'm very deliberate in ensuring that even if I'm printing out worksheets, for instance, or I'm telling them the stories in their class, I'm changing what was there initially to their own name so they are able to relate. I also find out names of siblings. Sometimes I get to find out the names of their siblings. So if I know that your sister is Tolu, if I know that your sister is Tolu, I'm telling that story and I'm saying, oh, Anu has 4 apples. She gave 4, or our sister Tolu gave her 2 more. So, oh, my sister is Tolu. Yeah, so they relate better, ensuring that, okay, they are well carried along, they are getting excited, each child feels involved in this learning, and then they can also bring their toys. Somebody says, okay, bring your toys, we're counting toys. Bring your own building blocks. We're counting building blocks. So I ensure that the children can relate with the items that I'm using. Also encourage questioning. Let them ask questions. When you're setting up or you're having your activities around the tables, allow them to ask questions on what they don't understand. Sometimes even observe how they're interacting with their peers. What are they saying? I also look out for how my learners use the keywords when they're having conversations. So if I set up something on the top tray that has to do with addition, for instance, I'm checking to see what words are they using. So when they are putting numbers on maybe a 10 frame, when I mentioned subitizing earlier, you can get children to subitize on 10 frames, on dominoes, on die, or using their own fingers. That's another way you get children to understand how numbers are represented, because they will be able to understand how 5 is represented on a die. When they see the, okay, I have 2 dots up, 2 dots down, 1 in the middle, that's 5. If I'm representing 3, it's like a slant, so they can see how it is represented. You can use a domino as well. You know, dominoes have 2 boxes, so they can see 4 and 2. They can see 1 and 1. They know, okay, that's 2, 4 and 2, that's 6. That's also another way to get children to understand numbers and how it is represented. So I was saying, say for instance, I set up a math activity on my top tray and I put a 10 frame, and the child is placing maybe we're using buttons to represent on a 10 frame, and the child is just putting it there. And I said, I'm putting 1, 2 on my block. I step in to say it's called a 10 frame. So you're representing 2 on a 10 frame. So getting them to use the keyword. So be deliberate in ensuring that you're listening to their conversation. You're observing them. It gets me excited when I hear my learners say, oh, I want to compare the length. I'm like, okay, we know length. That's great. So they should be able to tell the difference between height and length. So you're conscious in explaining to them, okay, when you're talking about height, you're looking at something that is standing vertically. When you're talking about length, you're looking at something that is aligned horizontally. So then you're using keywords like long and short. When you're talking about height, you're using keywords like tall and short. So we're not going to see tall and say it is long. No, it's not long, it is tall. So let's quickly look at the different activities I have said you can do to develop number sense. One, I said you can use counting games, which will help them to understand quantity. 2, number recognition, ensuring that they can match the numeral to the numbers. And then one-to-one correspondence, matching objects to numbers, pretty much close to quantifying, using manipulatives, that's using hands-on materials, number bonds, which also promotes critical thinking, reasoning, problem solving, pattern recognition, ensuring they can represent numbers following through the pattern. It will also help problem solving. Estimation, comparison, like comparing numbers, which is more, which is less. Word problems, using word problems during your lessons, using different numbers. Use mathematical languages. Make sure the children understand the vocabulary for the different concepts you're teaching, using games and puzzles. That was the last one. And finally, be sure to be consistent in ensuring that they are playing games, you're using puzzles to reinforce all of these concepts. Use real-world connection and encourage questioning. So that is all that I have to share on developing number sense in children. Remember, it is not about rushing them to get to bigger numbers. It is about ensuring that they master how to work with smaller numbers in different ways. When I put down 2, 4, 9, 10, can you order it correctly, starting from the smallest to the biggest? Can you represent the numbers? Can you match them to their quantities correctly? Can you subitize when I represent on a 10 frame? Can you add 2 or more numbers together? 2 or more smaller numbers, maybe 2 plus 2 plus 2 or 1 plus 3 plus 5. Can you give me number bonds of 5? Can you give me number bonds of 3? Can you write a number sentence? So when I say number sentence is, for instance, 2 and 3 would make 5. Now, can you write a number sentence with that? So that is like saying 2 plus 3, 5. That also helps. Can you make different number sentences with that? So you can give them 2 and 3 making 5. I say, okay, write different number sentences. So that way they can tell me 2 plus 3, 5. 3 plus 2, 5. 5 minus 3, 2. 5 minus 2, 3. So they'll be able to give you different number facts on those 3 numbers that you've mentioned, because they understand it. So ensuring that they understand, they're able to master the skill is the most important thing, and not just about getting children to rush through. So developing number sense in children is very important. And when you're able to develop a strong number sense in them, it will be useful for them in the future, because they will be able to work around different numbers as they move on to 20, move on to 50, move on to 100. It becomes a lot easier because they've already mastered the skill of working with smaller numbers, and they have a good understanding of these number concepts. So we've come to the end of today's live session. I hope you've enjoyed learning about developing number sense in children, and I'm hoping that you will be implementing this in class with the children. So thank you very much. Like I always say, I'm just a DM away. If you have any questions, if you have anything, any concept you'd like me to support you on, or to share ideas on how you can further support your children, your learners, please be sure to send me a DM. I will do my best to guide and support you. Bye for now.